Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep, and also that is here to help you deepen in your connection with your beautiful team of angels who love you so. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I do this through one-on-one angel sessions, which are beautiful. Soul mentoring, which is designed to provide you with consistent support as you move through a time of transformation or change in life. And I also offer a variety of classes and circles. When you wake up in the morning, you can learn more at my website, illuminatingsouls.com. I also have a Facebook page by the same name where I post every single day, and a daily inspiration email blast where you'll receive an inspiring message from me every weekday. All of this you can find on my website when you're awake. But for now, it's time to rest. You have done enough for the day. And the angels and I are here to help cultivate a sweet space of sanctuary where you can let go of whatever came before this moment and cozy on up. Fluff your pillows up just so. Snuggle on into your blankets or your bed and get comfortable. And I invite you to take some nice deep breaths in and out. We breathe all the time. But there is something different about intentional breath. When we intentionally fill our lungs with air and then release. You are a beautiful, precious being of light, having a human experience. And in this moment, there are waves of divine love pouring through for you. So just take a deep breath in and receive. The other day I was recording a Facebook Live, and one of the people who was watching asked such a powerful question. And it was a question about self-love and learning how to love oneself. You'd think that that would be one of the easiest things to do, but truly it is one of the most complicated, challenging experiences that many of us have in this lifetime. And this is what I shared. When I started at the University of Santa Monica, you have heard me talk about it before. It was the school that I went to learn spiritual psychology. And at the time I was enrolled there, I had such a hard time loving myself. it's not that it was all dark, but I could love myself when others loved me. I could love myself when I achieved something or when I was delightful. But I was definitely in the duality of this part of me I can love, but these parts I can't. And my shadow material just seemed to take up a lot of space in my consciousness. I really identified as my flaws and my shortcomings and all the things I wanted to do someday but I hadn't done yet, and what that must mean about me. So, that first weekend at USM, they led us through a process by which we would intuit a quality that we would be working with for the entire school year. No pressure there, right? The quality that came forward for me was self-love. Because I recognized that this was a quality I had challenge embodying. And then they had us attuned to an affirmation. And I know you've worked with affirmations before, but one of the things they taught us there I think is brilliant. They say that a good affirmation only needs to feel 50% true. So, this is the affirmation that came forward for me. I am experiencing joyful and radiant self-love, and I am loving me. And I am trusting in my knowingness and in my magnificence, and I am enthusiastically listening to the magic in my soul as it leads me on this beautiful journey as Laurel. So when I wrote this affirmation, it really felt more like a prayer. It felt like a wish. I knew at that moment that it wasn't true, but I wanted it to be true. I was absolutely in cooperation with those lines of energy. And as part of my process, I would say this affirmation out loud every single day. And when saying our affirmations out loud, it's important not to just mumble them. I know I mumbled it here, but it's because I'm hoping you're falling asleep. It would not be compatible with sleep if I were to say it loudly with lots of energy. But that's what I would do. I would say it as if it were my absolute truth. I would put it on like the perfect suit that fit me already, and I would say it and claim it and let it claim me. And many, many, many things happened that year. But the quality of self-love and that affirmation were my North Star. I say that affirmation now, and it is the absolute truth. I love myself. It doesn't mean that I don't have shadow material, that I also don't get disappointed with myself. There's a beautiful lyric written by David Wilcox, who is a wonderful singer-songwriter. And the lyric says, "There is a break in the cup that holds love inside of me." And I so deeply resonated with that. It felt like, yes, there was love and it would come in. But then when I was alone with my thoughts or whatever was troubling me, the love would just seep out. And so, as I learned to love myself well, the cup that holds love inside of me was mended. And when it gets mended, when anything gets mended, it doesn't get mended perfectly. It gets mended imperfectly. Right? That's what makes our journey so extraordinary. So self-love doesn't mean that we're happy with ourselves all the time. It simply means we can hold for our own journey with compassion and understanding and love. Divine love has a quality that has no polarity. It doesn't run out. The cup never runs out. It's one of the things I love so much about working with the angels. The cup of love is never empty. And on the days when it feels like my own cup maybe isn't so full, I just attune to the angels and they fill it back up again. So self-love is a journey. And it is a quality that we nurture as it nurtures us. It's not about looking in the mirror every morning going, I am so awesome. It's not egoic. It's gentle. And it's compassionate. It's recognizing our humanness and that this life is long and complicated. There's an ebb and flow to everything. So I don't know if you remember, but a few episodes back we talked about bedtime intentions. Another skill I learned at USM. All roads lead back to USM with me. But one of the things you can do tonight is set a bedtime intention where you can ask the angels to help amplify your connection and your experience with self-love. Angels, help me come into deeper loving with myself. Help me to be more patient and understanding and compassionate with myself. Help me to find avenues of delight about all that I am. Help me to make peace with my imperfections, what makes me different. Help me to discover my superpowers and help me come into balance with the light of the divine that I am. And just take a breath in. And I'm hoping you can feel the love of the angels. I have not yet formally invited them in, but they're here. But let's do that next. So beautiful angels on high, I know you are already here, and I am so deeply grateful for the love you are streaming in here now. Angels, I ask that you bring waves of divine love for each of the beloveds that are hearing this message. Help to lift from them any burdens they no longer need to carry. Help them see the brightness of their true spirit, so that when they awaken in the morning, they feel in harmony with the light of God. So, dear ones, just take a nice deep breath in and release. And let these waves of love flow over your body, allowing your body to experience deep waves of relaxation. Allowing your body to grow heavier as it releases the energy from the day. Allowing your consciousness to get quieter and drift off into the beautiful mystery of sleep. Allowing yourself to bathe in the divine love the angels are bringing to you. You are precious in all this world. You are a blessing from on high. You deserve a good night's rest. And you deserve beautiful days and weeks and months. While you rest, your angels will watch over you, and they will continue bringing you love even in the astral realm. And my hope is that you have sweet dreams, dreams that inspire your heart, so that whenever you wake up after a good rest, you will feel replenished, restored, and hopefully even inspired. So you rest well. And while you rest, I'm going to tell you a story. So tonight we're returning to the book, The Amulet by Edith Nesbitt. It's a beautiful, enchanting book that involves children and time travel and sand fairies, all the great elements of a children's book. So this is the 6th episode where we're reading from this book, so I'm going to catch you up a little bit. So there are 4 siblings, Cyril and Thea, Robert, and Jane. They do have a 5th sibling, a baby brother, who they lovingly refer to as the Lamb. And through a series of circumstances, their parents are away. Their mother has traveled to a kinder climate because she's ill and she's healing, and she took the baby with her. And the father has traveled to another country for business. So the children are living in London in the early 1900s, and they are staying in the care of old nurse. This is a nurse who took care of them throughout their childhood, and she now has a boarding house. So it's the 4 children staying with old nurse, and her only other lodger is an eccentric, educated scholar who studies antiquities. So think about Egypt and Babylon and the such. In another book, a previous book, the children became acquainted with a sand fairy called the Psammead. The Psammead is old, like as old as the earth, old, and can give wishes. So that's what the previous book was about. Like all good enchanted books, when the wishes are granted, they don't come out quite right. So the children have agreed with the Psammead that they will not ask them for any more wishes. But they do have a big wish in their heart, and that is the wish that Mother and the lamb and their father would come home. They could be a family again. So with the Psammead's help, they discover this powerful talisman called the Amulet in an antique store in London. But they only find half the amulet. The Psammead says, well, for this to be able to bring your family together, you need the whole amulet. It's thousands of years old, and they have no idea where the other half could be. So then the Psammead says, well, we can use this for time travel. Well, there's a good idea, right? So the children are now endeavoring to time travel to a time and place when the amulet was whole, so they can retrieve the other half of the amulet and then bring their family together. Simple, right? They bring their half of the amulet to the scholar who's staying with Old Nurse, and he knows the value of this, and he helps them discern the ancient name that is engraved upon the amulet. So when they say the name of power and hold the amulet up, it creates a portal, a gateway, where they can travel through to other dimensions, other times, I should say. So isn't this fascinating? This is a mechanism that's used in so many stories we see these days. And whenever they travel somewhere else, they can understand the language of wherever they are and be understood, which reminds me of the Doctor Who and the TARDIS, right? Or if you think of Stargate, all of these wonderful stories of traveling to other dimensions and times and spaces. It's just always so interesting. I love this I'm a sucker for time travel. Outlander, Doctor Who, sign me up. I love that stuff. So where we are in the story is the children had traveled to ancient Babylon in search for the other half of the amulet. And it's not that it went horribly, but it didn't go well. But they became acquainted with the Babylonian queen. Now, in their own time in London, there is some sort of magic in which they can't tell anyone about the Psammead. If they try, the other person doesn't hear them. But apparently there's a loophole that when they time travel, they can tell people about the Psammead. So while they met the queen, they were like, hey, we've got this friend, the Psammead, and they can grant wishes. Like, who doesn't want to tell that story? So as they get out of Babylon, which they have to because they were thrown in the dungeon, because of course, right, there's always a dungeon involved when you go to ancient civilizations and meet royalty. I'm really not doing a good job of catching you up, but I am delighting myself, so hopefully you're delighted as well. I just love this story. I'm just terrible at giving you a synopsis, but that's okay because hopefully you're asleep, right? Okay, so we'll keep going. So the queen, knowing that the Psammead grants wishes, makes the wish, I wish I could see you all soon. Not realizing that she is asking to be transported to the future in London. So they get back to London and the Psammead goes, hey geniuses, just so you know, this happened. And we're going to have to stick close because the queen's going to show up. And she does. And so she is very out of place in early 1900s London. She does not understand the peasants. Yes, again, going back to these archetypes. And the children decide to take her to the British Museum, where she causes quite the kerfuffle because she sees all of these jewels and treasures that belong to her. And They finally get the queen out of the museum, and they're standing in the museum courtyard. And the queen says to the Psammead, "I wish to have all of my possessions with me." Uh-oh, right? The Psammead, has to make the wish come true. So all of these treasures start floating out of the museum. A mammoth-sized stone bull comes levitating out of the museum, crashes through the windows, and columns and jewels. Like half the museum winds up levitating out into the courtyard with the queen and the children and the guards and the Psammead. And the reason I'm telling you all of this is what I found interesting. A reporter sneaks in and he asks the children, "Is she Annie Besant?" So for those of you who don't know, Annie Besant was a famous metaphysical author of the time. She was a theosophical scholar, author, teacher. And that's how they explained this to the public, that it was Annie Besant. So I thought that was funny. Sort of an inside joke of the time, I guess. So the Psammead says, "Listen, this isn't going to do. This isn't working. They're going to have me in a cage somewhere granting wishes to royals. You need to wish for everything to be back where it's supposed to be." And the queen acquiesces, and so all of the treasures go back into the museum. But now they're like, what do we even do with her? Now what? So this is where we're going to pick up. And so this is the end of that chapter. But in the next chapter, they go to Atlantis, which is, of course, super cool, right? It's not necessarily the metaphysical Atlantis in the New Age community that we think of with the dolphins and the crystals and the healing, but this is an interesting time, the 1900s, regarding mainstream ideas about Atlantis, which is probably a whole other podcast. But Atlantis had come back into mainstream culture right around this time. In the late 1800s, Ignatius Donnelly wrote a book about Atlantis that is, I guess, maybe laid some of the foundation to the archetypal Atlantis that has come into metaphysics, and that was built upon by Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy, and then later by Edgar Cayce. So I just think it's cool they go to Atlantis. So hang in there. We'll get there. But for now, they're in London with the Queen, trying to figure out how they're going to keep her entertained. Okay, here we go. The Amulet by Edith Nesbitt. "Take me to see your city," said the Queen. The children looked at each other. "If we had some money, we could take her about in a cab. People wouldn't notice her so much then, but we haven't." "Sell this," said the Queen, taking a ring from her finger. "They'd only think we'd stolen it," said Cyril bitterly, "and put us in prison." "All roads lead to prison with you, it seems," said the Queen. "The learned gentleman," said Anthea, and ran up to him with the ring in her hand. "Look here," she said. "Will you buy this for £1?" "Oh," he said in tones of joy and amazement, and took the ring into his hand. "It's my very own," said Anthea. "It was given to me to sell." "I'll lend you £1," said the learned gentleman, "with pleasure, and I'll take care of the ring for you. Who did you say gave it to you?" "We call her," said Anthea, "the Queen of Babylon." "Is it a game?" he asked hopefully. "It'll be a pretty game if I don't get the money to pay for cabs for her," said Anthea. "I sometimes think," he said slowly, "that I am becoming insane, or that I am not, and you're not, and she's not." "Does she say she's the Queen of Babylon?" he uneasily asked. Yes, said Anthea recklessly. This thought transference is far more reaching than I had imagined, he said. I suppose I have unconsciously influenced her, too. I never thought my Babylonish studies would bear fruit like this. Horrible. There are more things in heaven and earth. Yes, said Anthea, heaps more. And the pound is the thing I want more than anything on earth. He ran his fingers through his thin hair. So I should say he thinks that the children are coming up with these stories about Babylon through thought transference because he's studying it. Because otherwise, how could they know what they know about Babylon? So this is why he's struggling with the insight that Anthea has. Okay, back to the story. This thought transference, he said, it's undoubtedly a Babylonian ring, or it seems so to me. But perhaps I have hypnotized myself. I will see a doctor the moment I have corrected the last proofs of my book. Yes, do, said Anthea, and thank you so very much. She took the sovereign and ran down to see the others. And now from the window of a four-wheeled cab the Queen of Babylon beheld the wonders of London. Buckingham Palace, she thought, uninteresting. Westminster Abbey and the Houses of Parliament, a little better. But she liked the Tower and the river, and the ships filled her with wonder and delight. But how badly you keep your slaves. How wretched and poor and neglected they seem, she said as the cab rattled along the Mile-End Road. They aren't slaves. They're working people, said Jane. Of course they're working. That's what slaves are. Don't you tell me. Do you suppose I don't know a slave's face when I see it? Why don't their masters see that they're better fed and better clothed? Tell me in 3 words. No one answered. The wage system of modern England is a little difficult to explain in 3 words, even if you understand it, which the children didn't. You'll have a revolt of your slaves if you're not careful, said the Queen. Oh no, said Cyril. You see, they have votes. That makes them safe not to revolt. It makes all the difference. Father told me so. What is this vote? Asked the Queen. Is it a charm? What do they do with it? I don't know, said the harassed Cyril. It's just a vote, that's all. They don't do anything particular with it. I see, said the Queen. A sort of plaything. Well, I wish that all these slaves may have in their hands this moment their fill of their favorite meat and drink. Instantly, all the people in the Mile-End Road and in all the other streets where poor people live found their hands full of things to eat and drink. From the cab window could be seen persons carrying every kind of food in bottles and cans as well. Roast meat, fowls, red lobsters, crabs, fried fish, boiled pork, beefsteak pudding, baked onions. Most of the young people had oranges and sweets and cake. It made an enormous change in the look of Mile-End Road, brightened it up, so to speak, and brightened up more than you can possibly imagine the faces of the people. Makes a difference, doesn't it? Said the Queen. That's the best wish you've had yet, said Jane with cordial approval. Just by the bank, the cabman stopped. I'm not going to drive you further, he said. Out you get. They got out rather unwillingly. I want my tea, he said, and they saw that on the box of the cab was a mound of cabbage with pork chops and applesauce, a duck and pudding, also a large can. You pay me my fare, he said threateningly, and looked down at the mound, muttering again about his tea. We'll take another cab, said Cyril with dignity. Give me change for a sovereign, if you please. But the cabman, as it turned out, was not a nice character. He took the sovereign, whipped up his horse, and disappeared in the stream of cabs and omnibuses and wagons. without giving them any change at all. Already a little crowd was collecting around the party. "Come on," said Robert, leading the wrong way. The crowd round them thickened. They were in a narrow street where many gentlemen in black coats and without hats were standing about on the pavement, talking very loudly. "How ugly their clothes are," said the Queen of Babylon. "They'd be rather fine men, some of them, if they were dressed decently, especially the ones with the beautiful, long, curved noses. I wish they were dressed like the Babylonians of my court." And of course it was so. The moment the almost fainting Psammead had blown itself out, every man in Throgmorton Street appeared abruptly in Babylonian full dress. All were carefully powdered, their hair and beards were scented and curled, their garments richly embroidered. They wore rings and armlets, flat gold collars and swords, and impossible-looking headdresses. A stupefied silence fell on them. "I say," a youth who had always been fair-haired broke that silence. "It's only fancy, of course. Something wrong with my eyes. But you chaps do look so rum." "Rum," said his friend. "Look at you in a sash, my hat. And your hair's gone black and you've got a beard. It's my belief we've been poisoned." "Oh, Levenstein, don't look so bad. But how it was done, that's what I want to know. How was it done? Is it conjuring or what?" "I think it's just a very bad dream," said old Levenstein to his clerk. "All along Bishopsgate I have seen people have their hands full of food, and good food. Oh yes, without a doubt, a very bad dream." "Then I am dreaming too, sir," said the clerk, looking down at his legs with an expression of loathing. "I see my feet in beastly sandals as plain as plain." "All that good food wasted," said old Mr. Levenstein. "A bad dream, a bad dream." The members of the stock exchange are said to be at all times a noisy lot. But the noise they made now to express their disgust at the costumes of ancient Babylon was far louder than their ordinary row. One had to shout before one could hear oneself speak. "I only wish," said the clerk, who thought it was conjuring. He was quite close to the children, and they trembled, because they knew that whatever he wished would come true. "I only wish we know who'd done it." And of course, instantly they did know. And they all pressed around the Queen. "Scandalous, shameful, ought to be put down by law. Give her in charge, fetch the police," 2 or 3 voices shouted at once. The Queen recoiled. "What is this?" she asked. "They sound like caged lions, lions by the 1,000. What is it they say?" "They say police," said Cyril briefly. "I knew they would sooner or later, and I don't blame them, mind you." "I wish my guards were here," cried the Queen. The exhausted Psammead was panting and trembling, but the Queen's guards in red and green garments and brass and iron gear choked Throgmorton Street, and bared weapons flashed around the Queen. "I'm mad," said a Mr. Rosenbaum. "That's what it is, mad." "It's a judgment on you, Rosie," said the partner. "I always said you were too hard in all of that matter of flower dew. It's a judgment, and I'm in it too." The members of the stock exchange had edged carefully away from the gleaming blades, the mailed figures, the hard, cruel Eastern faces. But Throgmorton Street is narrow, and the crowd was too thick for them to get away as quickly as they wished. "Kill them," cried the Queen. The guards obeyed. So I'm going to skip the next part because it gets a little chaotic, and we're going to skip to the better part, that this whole scenario ends when one of the men from the stock exchange, after seeing all the chaos happening, says, "I wish to goodness it was all a dream." So he made the wish that undid everything. So I wished to goodness it was all a dream. And of course, instantly it was. The entire stock exchange rubbed its eyes. No one said a word about it to anyone else. I think I have explained before that businessmen do not like it to be known that they have been dreaming in business hours, especially mad dreams, including such dreadful things as hungry people getting dinners and the destruction of the stock exchange. The children were in the dining room at 300 Fitzroy Street, pale and trembling. The Psammead crawled out of the embroidered bag and lay flat on the table, its legs stretched out, looking more like a dead hare than anything else. Thank goodness that's over, said Anthea, drawing a deep breath. She won't come back, will she? Asked Jane. No, said Cyril. She's thousands of years ago, but we spent a whole precious £1 on her. It'll take all our pocket money for ages to pay that back. Not if it was all a dream, said Robert. The wish said, all a dream, you know, Panther. You cut up and ask if he lent you anything. I beg your pardon, said Anthea politely, following the sound of her knock into the presence of the learned gentleman. I'm so sorry to trouble you, but did you lend me £1 today? No, said he, looking kindly at her through his spectacles. But it's extraordinary that you should ask me, for I dozed for a few minutes this afternoon, a thing I very rarely do, and I dreamed quite distinctly that you brought me a ring that you said belonged to the Queen of Babylon, and I lent you a sovereign, and that you left one of the Queen's rings here. The ring was a magnificent specimen, he sighed. I wish it hadn't been a dream, he said, smiling. He was really learning to smile quite nicely. Anthea could not be too thankful that the Psammead was not there to grant his wish. And now we move on to Chapter 9, Atlantis. You will understand that the adventure of the Babylonian queen in London was the only one that had occupied any time at all. But the children's time was very fully taken up by talking over the wonderful things seen and done in the past, where by the power of the amulet they seemed to spend hours and hours, only to find when they got back to London that the whole thing had been briefer than a lightning flash. They talked of the past at their meals, in their walks, in the dining room, in the first-floor drawing room, but most of all on the stairs. It was an old house. It had once been a fashionable one, and was a fine one still. The banister rails of the stairs were excellent for sliding down, and in the corners of the landings were big alcoves that had once held graceful statues, and now quite often held the graceful forms of Cyril, Robert, Anthea, and Jane. One day, Cyril and Robert, in white underclothing, had spent a pleasant hour in reproducing the attitudes of statues seen either in the British Museum or Father's big photograph book. But the show ended abruptly because Robert wanted to be the Venus of Milo, and for this purpose pulled at the sheet which served as drapery at the very moment when Cyril, looking really quite like the Discobolus with a gold and white saucer for the disc, was standing on one foot, and under that one foot was the sheet. Of course, the Discobolus and his disc and the would-be Venus came down together, and everyone was a good deal hurt, especially the saucer, which would never be the same again. However neatly one might join the uneven bits with glue or the white of an egg. I hope you're satisfied, said Cyril, holding his head where a large lump was rising. Quite, thanks, said Robert bitterly. His thumb had caught in the banisters and bent itself back to almost a breaking point. I am so sorry, poor dear squirrel, said Anthea, and you are looking so lovely. I'll get a wet rag. Bobs, go up and hold your hand under the hot water tap. It's what ballet girls do with their legs when they hurt them. I saw it in a book. "What book?" said Robert disagreeably, but he went. When he came back, Cyril's head had been bandaged by his sisters, and he had been brought to the state of mind where he was able reluctantly to admit that he supposed Robert hadn't done it on purpose. Robert replying with equal suavity, and Thea hastened to lead the talk away from the accident. "I suppose you don't feel like going anywhere through the amulet," she said. "Egypt," said Jane promptly. "I want to see the pussycats." "Not me. Too hot," said Cyril. "It's about as much as I can stand here, let alone Egypt." It was indeed hot, even on the second landing, which was the coolest place in the house. "Let's go to the North Pole." "I don't suppose the amulet was ever there, and we might get our fingers frostbitten so that we could never hold it up to get home again." "No thanks," said Robert. "I say," said Jane, "let's get the Psammead and ask for its advice. It will like us asking even if we don't take it." The Psammead was brought up in its green silk embroidered bag. But before it could be asked anything, the door of the learned gentleman's room opened, and the voice of the visitor who had been lunching with him was heard on the stairs. He seemed to be speaking with the door handle in his hand. "You see a doctor, old boy," he said. "All that about thought transference is just simply twaddle. You have been overworking. Take a holiday." "I'd rather go to Babylon," said the learned gentleman. "I wish you'd go to Atlantis sometime while we're about it, so as to give me some nice tips for my 19th century article when you come home." "I wish I could," said the voice of the learned gentleman. "Goodbye. Take care of yourself." The door was banged, and the visitor came smiling down the stairs. A stout, prosperous, big man. The children had to get up to let him pass. "Hello, kiddies," he said, glancing at the bandages on the head of Cyril and the hand of Robert. "Been in the wars?" "It's all right," said Cyril. "I say, what was that Atlantic place you wanted him to go to? We couldn't help but hear you talking." "You talk so very loud, you see," Jane said soothingly. "Atlantis," said the visitor. "The lost Atlantis, great continent, disappeared in the sea. You can read about it in Plato." "Thank you," said Cyril doubtfully. "Were there any amulets there?" asked Anthea, made anxious by a sudden thought. "Hundreds, I should think." "So he's been talking to you?" "Yes, often. He's very kind to us. We like him awfully." "Well, what he wants is a holiday. You persuade him to take one. What he wants is a change of scene. You see, his head is crusted so thickly inside with knowledge about Egypt and Assyria and things that you can't hammer anything into unless you keep hard at it all day long for days and days, and I haven't time. But you live in the house. You can hammer almost incessantly. Just try your hands, will you? Right. So long." He went down the stairs 3 at a time, and Jane remarked that he was a nice man, and she thought he had little girls of his own. "I should like to have them to play with," she added pensively. The 3 elder ones exchanged glances. Cyril nodded. "All right, let's go to Atlantis," he said. "Let's go to Atlantis and take the learned gentleman with us," said Anthea. "He'll think it's a dream afterwards, but it'll certainly be a change of scene." "Why not take him to nice Egypt?" asked Jane. "Too hot," said Cyril shortly. "Or Babylon, where he wants to go." "Well, I've had enough of Babylon," said Robert, "at least for the present, and so have the others. I don't know why," he added, forestalling the question on Jane's lips. "But somehow we have, Squirrel. Let's take off these beastly bandages and get into flannels. We can't go in our unders." He wished to go to Atlantis, so he's got to go sometime, and he might as well go with us, said Anthea. This was how it was that the learned gentleman permitted himself a few moments of relaxation in his chair after the fatigue of listening to opinions about Atlantis and many other things, with which he did not at all agree, opened his eyes to find his 4 young friends standing in a row of him. "Will you come," said Anthea, "to Atlantis with us?" To know that you are dreaming shows that the dream is nearly at an end, he told himself. Or perhaps it's only a game, like how many miles to Babylon. So he said aloud, "Thank you very much, but I have only a quarter of an hour to spare." "It doesn't take any time," said Cyril. "Time is only a mode of thought, you know. And you've got to go sometime, so why not with us?" "Very well," said the learned gentleman, now quite certain that he was dreaming. Anthea held out her soft pink hand. He took it. She pulled him gently to his feet, and Jane held up the amulet. "To just outside Atlantis," said Cyril, and Jane said the name of power. "You owl," said Robert, "it's an island. Outside an island is all water." "I won't go, I won't," said the Psammead, kicking and struggling in its bag. And I should add, it's because the Psammead can't get wet. It's very dangerous for them to get wet. But already the amulet had grown to a great arch. Cyril pushed the learned gentleman, as undoubtedly the firstborn, through the arch, not into the water, but onto a wooden floor, out of doors. The others followed. The amulet grew smaller again. There they were, standing on the deck of a ship whose sailors were busy making her fast with chains to rings on a white quay side. The rings and the chains were of metal that shone red-yellow like gold. Everyone on the ship seemed too busy at first to notice the group of newcomers from Fitzroy Street. Those who seemed to be officers were shouting orders to the men. They stood and looked across the wide quay to the town that rose beyond it. What they saw was the most beautiful sight any of them had ever seen or ever dreamed of. The blue sea sparkled in soft sunlight. Little white-capped waves broke softly against the marble breakwaters that guarded the shipping of a great city from the wilderness of winter winds and the sea. The quay was of marble, white, sparkling with veining bright as gold. The city was of marble, red and white. The greater buildings that seemed to be temples and palaces were roofed with what looked like gold and silver, but most of the roofs were of copper that glowed golden red on the houses on the hills among which the city stood, and shaded into marvelous tints of green and blue and purple where they had been touched by the salt sea spray and the fumes of the dyeing and smelting works of the lower town. Broad and magnificent flights of marble stairs led up from the quay to a sort of terrace that seemed to run along for miles, and beyond rose the town built on a hill. The learned gentleman drew a long breath. "Wonderful," he said, "wonderful. I say, mister—" "What's your name?" said Robert. "He means," said Anthea with gentle politeness, "that we never can remember your name. I know it's Dr. de something. When I was your age, I was called Jimmy," he said timidly. "Would you mind? I should feel more at home in a dream like this if anything that makes me seem more like one of you." "Thank you, Jimmy," said Anthea with an effort. It seemed such a cheek to be saying Jimmy to a grown-up man. "Jimmy dear," she added, with no effort at all. Jimmy smiled and looked pleased. But now the ship was made fast, and the captain had time to notice other things. He came towards them, and he was dressed in the best possible dresses for the seafaring life. "What are you doing here?" he said rather fiercely. "Do you come to bless or to curse?" "To bless, of course," said Cyril. "I'm sorry if it annoys you, but we're here by magic. We come from the land of the sun rising," he went on to explain. I see, said the captain. No one had expected that he would. I didn't notice at first, but of course. I hope you're a good omen. It's needed. And this, he pointed to the learned gentleman. Your slave, I presume? Not at all, said Anthea. He's a very great man. A sage, don't they call it? And we want to see all your beautiful city, and your temples and things, and then we shall go back, and he will tell his friend, and his friend will write a book about it. What, asked the captain, fingering a rope, is a book? A record, something written, or, she added hastily, remembering the Babylonian writing, or engraved. A sudden impulse of confidence made Jane pluck the amulet from the neck of her frock. Like this, she said. The captain looked at it curiously, but the other three were relieved to notice without any of that overwhelming interest which the mere name of it had roused in Egypt and Babylon. The stone is of our country, he said, and that which is engraved on it is like our writing, but I cannot read it. What is the name of your sage? Jimmy, said Anthea hesitatingly. The captain repeated, Jimmy. Will you land, he added, and shall I lead you to the kings? Look here, said Robert, does your king hate strangers? Our kings are 10, said the captain, and the royal line, unbroken from Poseidon, the father of us all, has the noble tradition to do honor to strangers if they come in peace. Then lead on, please, said Robert, though I should like to see all over your beautiful ship and sail about in her. That shall be later, said the captain. Just now we're afraid of a storm. Do you notice that odd rumbling? That's nothing, master, said an old sailor who stood near. It's the storm coming in, that's all. Too loud, said the captain. There was a rather anxious pause, and the captain stepped onto the quay and the others followed him. All right, beautiful ones, we're going to end here. They have just stepped off the boat to step foot on Atlantis. I promise we'll return to this story. But I hope you're finding it enchanting. I love the way she writes. And hopefully you're asleep. And if you're not, you go ahead and queue up another episode. There are plenty out there that will keep you company. For now, though, I wish you sweet dreams. I wish you beautiful waves of inspiration. I wish you the deepest of love. I am so grateful for you. You are precious, and you are a blessing. And we'll talk again soon. Thank you.